Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you are watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top stories. Israel's foreign ministry says it rejects international pressure, including from the European Union, over its military actions in Gaza. Tensions rise as humanitarian concerns mount. Despite global calls for relief, the United Nations reports that aid has not yet reached Gaza's civilians. The lack of access fuels criticism for Israel's ongoing blockade. United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary David Lammy called the conflict in Gaza morally unjustifiable, urging restraint as casualties and criticism grow. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio denies reports of U.S. discussions to deport Palestinians from Gaza to Libya, dismissing the claim as misinformation. Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni says she is willing to help mediate if the Vatican backs U.S. President Donald Trump's war negotiation proposal, hinting at a possible new peace role. Russian bombers flew near Norwegian airspace escorted by aircraft from an unnamed country. The incident raises regional tension amid war concerns. Trump has proposed a $25 billion missile defense system dubbed Golden Dome, pledging it will be operational before the end of his term if re-elected. China's Commerce Ministry accuses the U.S. of economic bullying over chip export controls, warning of legal action and global supply chain instability. The European Union has announced a review of its trade and cooperation agreement with Israel amid escalating military action in Gaza and an ongoing blockade on aid. The review, backed by 17 EU foreign ministers, will assess whether Israel has breached human rights commitments under Article 2 of the EU-Israel Association Agreement. Let us listen to what the European Union has to say.
It is clear from today's discussion that there is a strong majority in favor of review of Article 2 of our association agreement with Israel. So we will launch this exercise, and in the meantime, it is up to Israel to unblock the humanitarian aid. Saving lives must be our top priority.
Israel has rejected the EU's move, calling it a misunderstanding of the region's complex realities. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom has halted trade talks, summoned Israel's ambassador, and sanctioned West Bank settlers, condemning the offensive as morally unjustifiable. This is what the UK Prime Minister stated.
But first, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to say something about the horrific situation in Gaza, where the level of suffering, innocent children being bombed again, is utterly intolerable. The recent announcement that Israel will allow a basic quantity of food into Gaza, a basic quantity, is totally and utterly inadequate. So we must coordinate our response, because this war has gone on for far too long. We cannot allow the people of Gaza to starve.
Despite trucks entering Gaza with critical supplies, the UN reports aid has not yet been distributed. On the ground, deadly Israeli strikes continue in Khan Yunis, killing at least 7 people across multiple raids, as global pressure on Israel mounts. Now we have Ross Feingold joining us as political risk analyst live from Taipei, Taiwan. Thank you for joining us. And has Israel violated the EU-Israel agreement by failing to uphold human rights obligation in its Gaza campaign?
Obviously, Israel disputes that contention. I think it's probably a safe assumption that the European Union is in fact going to find that Israel is in violation of its obligations under the association agreement between the EU and Israel. But ultimately, whatever the EU decides on this particular issue and whether or not Israel violates the wording of the agreement, Israel is probably not going to change how it's conducting the war in Gaza.
With 8 trucks reaching Gaza but no distribution taking place, what do you think is blocking humanitarian access on the ground?
The reality is they're still fighting there. The Israeli army is involved in an ongoing war with Hamas. There's hostilities that are occurring pretty much nonstop. That makes it difficult to distribute aid. First, it makes it difficult for the trucks to drive in. And secondly, it makes it difficult to have people line up and have aid distributed. So there needs to be some kind of downturn in the fighting so that it's safe for the deliveries and distribution to civilians to occur. Unfortunately, that's not where we are at the moment. At the moment, there's ongoing hostilities.
As the EU and UK take action and civilians deaths mount, could international pressure force a shift in Israel's military strategy?
That's a really good question. At the moment, it seems like the answer to that is no. And Israel is extremely sensitive and often rejects the views of its international partners, whether that's the European Union, the United Kingdom, or even the United States at times. However, I still think we have to keep in mind that Israel is sensitive to international opinion. It's not going to completely ignore it, even though it rejects some of the accusations that we've seen in recent hours from EU officials or from UK officials. So we could be cautiously optimistic that there might be a ceasefire, or there might be something like a humanitarian pause where Israel pauses hostilities for several hours a day to allow food distribution to occur. So there are some possibilities for Israel to slightly adjust its military campaign in order to allow food distribution to take place.
Thank you so much for joining us, Ross Feingold. The United States has unveiled plans for a sweeping new missile defensive initiative known as the Golden Dome, a high-tech system that President Donald Trump says will defend America against next-generation aerial threats. The program, inspired by Israel's Iron Dome but far more advanced, will feature space-based sensors and interceptors capable of tracking and destroying missiles anywhere in the world, even from space. Trump says the system will be fully operational by the end of his term, with an initial $25 billion allocated in his new defense budget. The system will be overseen by Space Force General Michael Getlain and will centralize U.S. missile defense across land, sea, and space. Canada has expressed interest in joining the project, as global allies watch this historic step towards space-based defense. Let us listen to what U.S. President Trump has said on the dome.
And for the Golden Dome will integrate with our existing defense capabilities and should be fully operational before the end of my term. So we'll have it done in about 3 years. Once fully constructed, the Golden Dome will be capable of intercepting missiles even if they are launched from other sides of the world and even if they are launched from space. I'm also pleased to report that the One Big Beautiful Bill will include $25 billion for the Golden Dome to help construction get underway. That's the initial sort of a down deposit. And we have probably, you're talking about, General, we're talking about $175 billion total cost of this when it's completed.
China has issued a strong warning against new U.S. guidance targeting advanced Chinese-made AI chips. The U.S. recently cautioned companies that use Huawei's Ascend chips could violate export rules. In response, Beijing has said that it may take legal action against any individual or organization that enforces or assists in enforcing the U.S. measures. China's Commerce Ministry called the move discriminatory and accused the U.S. of abusing export controls to suppress Chinese firms. Officials in Beijing also warned that such actions threaten the global semiconductor supply chain and risk harming international trade relations. They promised firm countermeasures to defend Chinese companies and national interests. Washington says its restrictions are meant to keep powerful AI technologies out of the hands of adversaries. The Commerce Department stated it wants to share AI tools only with trusted partners. The US has placed countries into 3 tiers for AI chip exports. Allies like Japan face no restrictions. Others, such as Mexico, are subject to limits. China, however, remains heavily restricted. Chip makers like NVIDIA and AMD had earlier pushed back on tiered restrictions, warning they could lose ground to Chinese competitors. Markets reacted positively when the US agreed to review those rules. Still, the updated guidance now tightens the focus on chips made in China itself. Huawei, in particular, is once again at the center of a major geopolitical tech dispute. This fresh warning from China signals growing tension in the ongoing battle for control over next-generation technology and global semiconductor dominance. We have guests joining us. In a major policy shift, the European Union has agreed to lift its economic sanctions on Syria, marking a potential turning point after 14 years of civil war. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas made the announcement after talks in Brussels, saying the goal is to help rebuild a peaceful and inclusive Syria. Core sanctions targeting the Assad regime and security-related restrictions will remain, but the EU will ease measures on energy, transport, and reconstruction, inviting European business back into the country. Syria's foreign minister praised the decision as a boost to stability and economic recovery. The move comes just days after US President Donald Trump announced a similar lifting of sanctions. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio warned that Syria's transitional authority may be close to collapse. The EU stressed future cooperation depends on Syria's commitment to human rights and inclusion. Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni says Rome is ready to help mediate Ukraine peace talks, only if the Vatican agrees to lead. As suggested by US President Donald Trump, the Vatican has shown interest, but no talks have been confirmed yet. In Washington, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio defended the administration's stance on Russia. He rejected claims that President Putin is stalling. Rubio told senators that Trump made no concessions to Moscow. He said US sanctions remain in place and military support for Ukraine continues. Rubio also expects Russia to present draft ceasefire terms within days. He believes the proposal will reveal Moscow's true intentions. Listen into what Marco Rubio has said.
On the issue of Ukraine, here's what we can all agree on. There is no military solution to this crisis.
Right.
It will have to end in a negotiated settlement. And the fundamental challenge we have in Ukraine is this. Russia wants what they do not currently have and are not entitled to.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says new EU and UK sanctions will raise pressure on Russia. He urges tougher action on Russian oil, banks, and defense sectors. Zelensky insists sanctions are key to forcing Putin towards real peace talks. Here's what Zelensky has said.
Сьогодні є важливі рішення щодо санкцій. Новий європейський санкційний пакет вже 17-й. Це крок в правильному напрямку. І має бути взагалі стільки санкційних кроків, скільки потрібно, щоб Росія зацікавилась миром та відчула повну ціну за агресію та бажання затягнути війну.
Meanwhile, Ukrainian presidential advisor Mikhailo Podolyak says pressure is key. He urged the US and Europe to push Russia harder with tough sanctions. He warned that without pressure, Moscow will avoid real negotiations. Here's what the Ukrainian presidential advisor has said.
Росія без тиску не буде ні на що йти, ні на які реалістичні переговори. А якщо, скажімо так, погоджуватись на умови Росії, вони є неприйнятними по природі своїй, тому що Росія висуває знову ж таки нереалістичні вимоги до України.
Simultaneously, Russia sent a clear signal in the skies. 2 Tu-95M bombers flew over the Barents Sea near Norway. A foreign military escorted the Russian planes during the 4-hour flight. The escort nation remains unnamed. Now we have guest joining us, Jim Rice, Professor of International Law, live joining us from Vigan's, Philippines. Thank you for joining us. How do international legal frameworks influence the legitimacy of mediation efforts in the Ukraine conflict, particularly with Italy and the Vatican even offering to mediate these peace talks?
If that's a question about the international legal framework, the answer is starkly simple. First of all, Putin and his forces should cease fire and withdraw from all of the territory that they illegally invaded and occupied since February 2022 in contravention of all of the principles of the United Nations. So that's the framework of international law. If you're asking me questions about international diplomacy, the answer would be slightly different, I suppose.
And Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has offered to mediate Ukraine peace talks contingent on Vatican involvement. How crucial is the role of religious and neutral entities like the Vatican in facilitating these peace negotiations in such high stakes conflicts?
Well, I think that the involvement of the Vatican and the Prime Minister Meloni can only be a good thing. It hasn't been tested yet. As we recall, Trump's campaign promise was that he could end the war in 24 hours. We're already 5 months in. Obviously, Trump didn't know what he was talking about, or he was lying in this case. So let us hope that Prime Minister Meloni and the Pope can help to mediate. However, I would suggest that Putin has no desire or no motivation for ending this war. And the reason that I say that is because if he were to end the war, if the war were to come to an end today, Putin would be ousted from office and would probably lose his life. He's staked his whole career on trying to erase Ukraine from the map and to try and reconstruct the Soviet Union.
Ukrainian President Zelensky has emphasized tougher sanctions on Russia's oil, banks, and defense sectors. In your opinion, do you see that economic sanctions alone have the power to force a significant change in Russia's position?
Well, maybe not alone, but I would agree that the sanctions are absolutely essential and they should be tightened. I noticed, sadly, that just yesterday Rubio, the U.S. Foreign Secretary, came out and said that they shouldn't resort to sanctions because it would discourage Russia. But Russia's been stalling and delaying and lying about this. First of all, entering into a ceasefire, which is absolutely essential, and secondly, entering into serious and realistic and sincere peace talks, which he has not done.
Last but not least, if Ukraine accepts mediation by a religious entity like the Vatican, could that influence future claims at international courts such as the ICJ or ICC regarding war conducts?
No, I really don't. I don't see it that way at all. I see that any kind of input as a mediator by the Pope or by another interested party or neutral party can only be a good thing. It doesn't diminish from traditional international mediation such as the International Court of Justice or the ICC. It basically complements it, I would say.
Thank you so much for joining us. According to U.S. officials, Israel is preparing for a potential strike on Iranian nuclear facilities. This development comes amid ongoing diplomatic efforts by the U.S. to negotiate with Tehran over its nuclear program. A military strike by Israel could significantly disrupt these efforts and escalate tensions in the region, potentially triggering a wider conflict. U.S. officials cautioned that while Israeli military activity has increased, it remains unclear whether Israel has made a final decision to act. Meanwhile, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has expressed doubt that nuclear talks with the U.S. will yield any meaningful results. Khamenei criticized Washington's demand that Iran cease enriching uranium. Calling it a big mistake, he emphasized Iran's right to enrich uranium under the UN's Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The standoff continues as both sides struggle to find common ground, with U.S. officials urging tougher restrictions on Iran's nuclear capabilities. Indian writer, lawyer, and activist Banu Mushtaq has made history by winning the prestigious International Booker Prize for her short story anthology Heart Lamp. This marks the first time a book written in Kannada, the language of Karnataka in southern India, has received this honor. Let's listen to what she has said.
I was born from the belief that no story is ever small, that in the tapestry of human experience, every thread holds the weight of the whole. In a world that often tries to divide us, literature remains one of the lost sacred spaces where we can live inside each other's minds, if only for a few pages. To every reader who trusted me with their time, thank you for letting my words wander into your heart.
The anthology, translated into English by Deepa Basti, consists of 12 stories spanning 3 decades, from 1990 to 2023, focusing on the hardships faced by Muslim women in southern India. Mushtaq, known for her work advocating women's rights and social justice, has faced significant personal challenges, including threats and a fatwa for her views on women's rights within Islamic spaces. Despite these obstacles, her writings have earned multiple national awards. Mushtaq's win comes a year after Gitanjali Shree's Tomb of Sand won the International Booker, highlighting India's increasing influence in global literacy circles. Now we move on to North America. Elon Musk says he's not going anywhere, confirming he'll remain Tesla's CEO for at least the next 5 years. Speaking at the Qatar Economic Forum, the world's richest man said his continued leadership is about retaining control of the company, not about money. His comments come amid a stormy quarter for Tesla, which saw sales drop by 13% and net profits plunge by over 70%. The biggest hit in the company's history. Musk, who has recently traveled to Doha as part of Donald Trump's Middle East push, also defended his controversial political involvement. When pressed about the impact of his ties to Trump on Tesla, Musk said he faced massive violence against his companies and called out what he described as judicial overreach in his blocked $56 billion pay package. Tesla remains under scrutiny from investors as Musk tries to balance tech, politics, and public perception. Attorneys say the Trump administration deported Vietnamese and Burmese migrants to South Sudan, violating a federal court order. The emergency motion filed on Tuesday alleges that at least a dozen migrants were removed without proper notice or a chance to contest. A Burmese national with limited English was among them. His lawyer, Jacqueline Brown, says he was removed without an interpreter. She discovered he was already deported when she tried to meet him Tuesday morning. U.S. District Judge Brian Murphy previously barred deportations to third countries without written notice and hearings. He warned that the deportations might constitute criminal contempt. Southern Sudan remains under a U.S. do not travel advisory due to armed conflict. Lawyers are urging the judge to order the migrants' return and block further removals. The Department of Homeland Security hasn't confirmed the deportations. The legal battle adds to growing scrutiny of the administration's deportation policies. The World Health Organization has adopted a global pandemic accord aimed at enhancing preparedness for future health crises following the uneven global response to COVID-19. After 3 years of negotiations, the legally binding treaty was passed by the World Health Assembly in Geneva. The agreement seeks to ensure equitable access to vaccines, drugs, and therapeutics during the future pandemics, with manufacturers required to allocate a portion of supplies to the WHO. However, the absence of the United States raises concerns over its effectiveness as the U.S. withdrew from WHO discussions under the Trump administration. While some experts view the pact as a step towards greater global health equity, others caution that its success depends on robust implementation. Indian authorities have arrested nearly a dozen people across northern states for allegedly spying for Pakistan, following the deadliest India-Pakistan conflict in decades. According to police, at least 11 individuals were detained in Haryana, Punjab, and Uttar Pradesh, including a travel blogger, a student, and a businessman. They are all accused of leaking sensitive military data to Pakistan's intelligence agency, the ISI. Punjab's police chief said 2 men were arrested for transmitting classified details about Indian military operations, including New Delhi's retaliatory strike deep into Pakistani territory earlier this month. Investigators say the suspects were recruited through social media, financial inducements, and even personal visits to Pakistan. Some reportedly maintained direct contact with Pakistani handlers. The arrests follow a violent escalation triggered by an April 22nd attack on tourists in Indian-administered Kashmir, an attack India blames on Pakistan, though Islamabad denies any involvement. At least 60 people died in the subsequent fighting, which saw missile, drone, and artillery strikes exchanged for 4 days before a ceasefire was agreed. This marks the most serious confrontation between the nuclear-armed rivals since the 1999 Kargil War. Authorities say investigations are ongoing and more arrests could follow. Now, some of these suspected spies, those who are arrested, are Jyoti Malhotra, a travel vlogger from Haryana, accused of leaking sensitive information. Devender Singh Dillon, a postgraduate student, arrested in connection with the espionage case. Muhammad Tarif, a president of Kangarka village in Mewat, Haryana, alleged to have shared sensitive military information with officials from the Pakistan High Commission. Noman Elahi, arrested in Haryana, investigations reveal he directed financial transactions related to the spy network. Arman, another individual arrested in Haryana, further details about his role are under investigation. Shahzad, a businessman from Muradabad, Uttar Pradesh, arrested by the Uttar Pradesh Anti-Terrorist Squad and placed in 14-day judicial custody. Sukhpreet Singh, arrested in Gurdaspur, Punjab for allegedly transmitting sensitive details about military operations. Karanbir Singh, also arrested in Gurdaspur, Punjab, alongside Sukhpreet Singh, involved in leaking strategic information. Well, that's all we have time for. We will continue to bring more news updates from around the world.